I want to first give a little background that my name is Darryl Vincent. I work with U.S. Vets for the last 18 years. We have several locations across the nation that present unique challenges as well as responsibilities because we're in different geographics, demographics all across the country, which allows us to be diverse by accident, not necessarily by purpose. And I think that's the thing that we're talking about moving forward is how do we make purposeful decisions and being deliberate. And I'm honored to be here speaking with Jeffrey and Sean and moving this pendulum forward to make sure that we are addressing the social inequities and racial injustice that come across this country that inevitably affect our veterans as well. Next slide. Now, needless to say, the fact that we're sitting in front of the screen in 2020 and not sitting with each other speaks to the fact of how March 2020 to now has been just one year that we can either say it's been a challenge. Without challenge, we would not know the next step. But the reality of the situation, we would be together. And if that wasn't enough, as Jeffrey just pointed out greatly, we had COVID and then we had to deal with the social unrest. And the social unrest and the murder of George Floyd divided our country. And I think that was just illustrated. It's not here for me to tell you what side that you fall on. All I can tell you is that if veterans are suffering any kind of discrimination simply by the base of their color, their skin, their culture, their ethnicity, then it's up for all of us to solve. We no longer can say we stand for the veterans and work for the veterans. We don't solve the social inequities and discrimination this country has done in the past years, and yet say we stand with the veterans. As you will see on the slide, and as Sean pointed out, over 2/3 of the veterans that we serve are of color and homeless. 2/3. That's extremely disproportionate to the total amount of veteran population. This is not by accident. This is by institutional, historic, systemic discrimination and bias. And we first must acknowledge this without any ambiguity in order to address it. And we also need to say that it's not any one person's fault, but it's all about responsibility. And that's the difference. A lot of times we get into rooms and people feel guilty about this. If we're not being uncomfortable, then we're not making change. So we want to say there's no one person's fault. It's everyone's responsibility. And U.S. Vets has chosen to address this head on. We don't see this as a Republican or Democratic issue, a black or white issue, a gay or straight issue. We see this as a human issue, right or wrong. And as long as we all can agree on those terms, and I'm imagining everyone on this call, not everyone's a veteran, probably 1/3, even less than that, we're probably formerly homeless veterans, but yet every day we come together and serve homeless veterans with empathy. How do we do that? Yet all of us were never homeless veterans. So you cannot tell me we cannot join the cause together and make something happen. If we could put a man on the moon, we can solve racial discrimination. It's a choice. So the demographics you see, I don't have to read them over. You can see them. It's time for us to address this age-old problem, because if you have a pandemic or health disparities, when you have a national crisis or a global crisis, the marginalized population feels it even more. If upper middle class and middle class catches a cold, marginalized people catch the flu. And we need to understand that it's time for us to address that. And our veteran population is part of that. Next slide. So, as I pointed out, it's our responsibility to act. We were blessed and lucky, thanks to our development team. Many of my U.S. Vets colleagues are on this call, the executive directors across the nation, all 11 of them, my development department, my CEO, Steve Peck. We decided that we went for a grant and partnered with Boeing, and Boeing wanted to help us to help African-American veterans or veterans of color get employed. Pretty simple, something that we do anyway. We could do that and say, okay, give us the funds, we'll make sure that we help them with these things. But we saw this as a direct opportunity of how we can train our staff, how we can make sure that we are understanding what it truly means, not just saying, let's just find some veterans that are minorities and give them some jobs. We wanted to make sure our partners and how we can understand and address this problem systematically. Because I think a lot of times when we work in the social work field, we do these things called workarounds. Workarounds is the system is not working, but I know this person's sitting over here, so I can call them and they'll get them through the system, but that never really changes the system. And that's the problem that has always been occurred in a lot of facets. As Jeffrey pointed out, a lot of people wanted to talk about the response to the protests. Whether you stand on what side of the fence you stand on, it doesn't matter to me. What matters is when people continually say, turn the other cheek, I always tell them, just tell them don't hit us in the first place. Then that would be where we start. That's the action. So the action of changing the system is how do we change the system from within? And the only way you do that, I challenge anyone on this call to tell me the one time we've changed anything in this country without unrest. Our whole country was based on the Revolutionary War. Unrest is how you make things change. It doesn't have to be violent all the time. That's not what I'm promoting. But I'm saying if you're not making people uncomfortable, if you're not addressing it, if you're not taking opportunities such as we're doing with Boeing to say, yes, we can employ 40 veterans, but you know what? There's a bigger picture here. And Boeing was so ecstatic. They're like, yes, if you're willing to expand this, we would love it. Can you tell us what you're going to do? So I like to say, we want to change the system. We just don't want to employ 40 veterans and say, we did our job. Thank you, Boeing. Give us something, give us the money. We'll do that, because we do that anyway. So what are we really trying to change? Next slide. So we did a comprehensive approach. We took this and said, you know what? There's some money in this pot that we can put into training, or we can actually say a smart man doesn't not only know what he knows what he does not know. It wasn't up to us to grab all the minority veterans in our organization and say, okay, let's create a program simply because we're a minority. Now, we may understand our truth, our plight, our story, and we should be adding to that. But there are actual people that do this for a living. This is what they do. They went to school, they were trained for it. They understand when you say DEI, what does that mean? How do you change the system? How do you do these things? So we wanted to have some clear objectives of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in our organization, because we knew we were diverse, because we're in 6 different places, and we're definitely more women dominated in the social work field. We have minorities, but we can honestly say, to be transparent, we did it just because of accident. We hired the best person for the job, and it happened to be those people. It wasn't purposeful. It wasn't deliberate. It wasn't saying we need to make sure that we're having this. So it gave me a new lens to say, how do I make sure that I'm being deliberate in this, and not just saying, well, we're making sure that we're diverse so we can accurately reflect the population that we serve. So we wanted to talk about staff training, volunteer leadership, client impact, and most importantly, one of the more important things when you change the system, we want to adopt this to have as part of our strategic plan. It's called putting your money where your mouth is. Everyone talks about, hey, let's be diverse, let's do this. Who's willing to put those words in their plan and say, this is what we're doing. We're not going to hide from it. We're going to say, this is what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. Next slide, please. So we took advantage of the funding interests to basically, how can we change what we do in our organization as staff? I think the next slide will say it, I'll say it ahead of time, is I'm a firm believer, coming from a programmatic system, and that's what my thing is I like to do, to run operations, make sure programs and systems are working, is the therapeutic approach never works if you're not modeling the behavior you're trying to teach. Every community, you cannot sit, when staff is working in a residential setting such as us, we cannot walk around and act like we're different or we are not a part of that community. We're working where their home is. So how can you say you're excluded from that? How can we say be diverse, help each other, teach each other, make sure that you're policing each other? How can we say that if we're not doing it ourselves? So we can easily say, well, let's make sure that we're employing these veterans, but what if the organization is not doing it? What if we're not practicing diversity at the higher levels or equity or inclusion? Are we sitting at the table saying who's not sitting here, not being representative? Because what we've learned through our trainings is the more people at the table, the better your organization is. The more ideas at the table, the better your organization is. It's been proven through systematic approaches and through data that you have a more high excelling company when you have more diversity sitting in that room, because now you have different people from different ethnics, and not saying, well, I just want to treat everybody the same. Treating everyone the same is equality. We want to talk about equity. I don't want people to look at someone and say, well, I don't see color. We want you to see color, because then you're saying you're not seeing me. You need to see who I am. See who I am. This is where I'm representing, and this is what we want to bring to the table. I'm saying all this to say that I'm extremely blessed to work in an organization that has allowed me to speak this freely. And that's why it's so important, that we'll talk about later, what Jeffrey pointed out earlier as well, is important to have allies, for people that are sitting on the call saying, well, I'm uncomfortable. I don't want to talk about these things. No major change has ever happened without allies. You can no longer ask the minority to change the problems of the majority. It's just unreasonable. Solve our problems for us. No, we can help. Join us, and we do it together. So we're not looking to exclude, we're looking to include, and it's okay to have a difference of opinion. I think everyone on the call that works with me, my team, if they're on the call, They're probably chuckling saying, I love having I say fight, they say discussion. Let's have the fight about what's right. Let's be more invested in getting it right than being right. So let's have that fight, because then we walk out the room, we have the best ideas. How can you have the best ideas if you only have one representation? You just cannot. So we wanted to talk about how we're going to do that with our partners. Next slide. So first and foremost, what we did is we hired a national director of workforce programs. Many people that run homeless programs or veterans experiencing homelessness programs, the HVRP grant, we have a CDI grant, Call of Duty. These are grants that help us help veterans that are getting out of the military, that are experiencing homelessness, get them back to work. I think a lot of us are familiar with that. But we never, as an organization, brought that all together to put it under one umbrella to say we want to have one person that's guiding that and guiding that in an equitable manner. A lot of times people get confused when affirmative action came out and when people started targeting minorities, that they thought it was unfair. And the reality is that everything that's being created systematically is called opportunity and access. That's what we're trying to promote, is that people should have the same opportunity and same access regardless of the color of their skin or their cultural background or their sexual orientation. So what we said is we want to have a national director for a workforce program that is going to focus on the Boeing grant, but how can she focus on that, or he, and it's a she, how can she focus on that? And this is the purpose of it, without also being included in our DEI initiative. We want to make sure that we're doing it the right way. So we hired that person, and it's not only to increase employment, but to actually develop opportunities for their career. We don't want to get people jobs. We want to put them on a career path, and we don't make sure we remove the barriers for them to go to work that's sometimes not allowed in the grants. A lot of times the grants, and rightfully so, they're outcome based on, did they get a job placement? What's the job placement? And I would love to start seeing more grants where the outcome is, are they placed in a training career path, that they complete a class, that they complete the next class, and then do longitudinal data that they completed and what was their job after that. But we're so in the moment. We want the 1 year, employ 100 veterans, get them done, and you're putting veterans in jobs that are not their careers. And yes, you can say, well, it's good, they're learning things, but how many of us know you want to work in a job that you really want to do something and you do a better job at it when you do your strengths? There's a saying if you find a job you love, you never work a day in your life. I say that's ridiculous. If you find a job that you love, you just don't mind working as hard. You work hard and the tools are just a little more light in your hand because you love what you do. I think all the colleagues on here from U.S. Vets will say, I love my job, but yes, I work hard. It's not that I don't work a day in my life. We do. Next slide. So we started having conversations. As Jeff pointed out, Jeffrey, it was an emotional time when the George Floyd murder happened. It took me a week before I could address the staff nationally with the video that is for public consumption. It's on YouTube. I want to again give credit to my boss, Steve Peck, who is not of color, but was an ally when I asked, is it okay if I address our staff about where U.S.VETS stands with this thing? I feel compelled to do it. Compelled that if my father can march in civil rights, this is the least I can do. If the things that they've done, I owe that I need to do this. And Steve wrote a letter and I did a video. And we didn't sanitize it. We didn't try to make it, oh, it's okay. It was not okay. And it drew emotion and invoked emotion in everyone. We had tears, people cried, we hugged each other, we spoke about it, and it made it even more amplified because it was COVID. So it had to be done remotely. We weren't allowed to be able to invade each other's presence, but we did the best we could. I asked all the executive directors across the nation to sit with their team and have an open discussion. And I want to make sure everybody understands, even for those that don't necessarily feel affected by it, there are many people that get offended when they hear Black Lives Matter. There are many people that get offended when they hear these things that are going on, as Jeffrey pointed out, as far as two polarities are standing across from each other. We weren't here to convince anyone of what's right or wrong in that case. We were here to say, here's your venue to talk about it, so we can put it on the table, so we can address it, because that's what helps is dialogue. And we did have some people that did not understand. We did have some people that were like, well, this happened, that happened, because they didn't come from that culture or understand, even though you can see it on TV, people still, as you can see on TV, people still will defend it sometimes. To me, it's the difference between right and wrong. And if you can just stay on that path, then we can talk about those other things and get intertwine them. So all the executive directors, and you've seen a few pictures of them, they were allowed to have a meeting with their staff and do follow-up meetings to literally open the door and just say, there's a lot going on in our country right now. Let's talk about it. The feedback was enormous. I've never worked for a company that allowed us to talk honestly about it. It made it a safe place. It made me feel like, okay, it's okay to hurt. It's okay for me not to understand. It's okay for me to not even relate. It's okay for me to feel like I have white privilege, but I don't know what that means. And I'm sad, I'm sorry that you're telling me about this. All these new terminologies that are out that are causing emotion, it doesn't help if you bury them. You have to talk about them, and you have to have a company that's willing to say, talk about it. It's okay. You know, I know everyone has to put HR in the corner and say, okay, watch us, make sure we don't get in trouble. Well, I say, have the conversation. You know, have the conversation. Be genuine to your heart and you're true to your heart, and let the chips fall where they may. As long as you're not offending anyone, and I trusted the 11 executive directors that work with me, that they know how to do that, and they did it in spades. So that's what we did. We have a new HR director in charge of national. He turned us on to a DEI certification program for the University of South Florida, I think it was. It was a 7-week program. You had to watch it, you had to take a test, you had to pass it in order to get the certificate. Doesn't mean that you're an expert in it now, but it taught me so many things. It taught me so many things about microaggression that I never paid attention to before. That when I got compliments before about, oh, you speak so well, I thought it's always sounded funny to me, but I never knew how to put a label on it. Like, what was that, what they're saying? What did you expect me to sound like? What is it? Why are you saying I speak well? I finally started to be able to put names to it. And I'm not someone that's hypersensitive, by the way. I'm a native New Yorker. I'm in Hawaii now, but I'm a native New Yorker. So I grew up in Harlem and then Washington, D.C. So it's not like I'm sensitive to things. I can take it, understand. I have many friends across the spectrum, but I knew it didn't sit right with me. And I was trying to figure out why. And that certification told me, oh, these are the things that I have. So all it did was make me conscious. Doesn't mean I'm going to walk around like a police all the time saying, oh, you did this or you did. No, because that doesn't solve anything. What solves it is conversation. Hey, can I have a minute with you? You know, and we talk. So we did that. We have our Reliance training. We provide training to the staff with NCHV, obviously, or they're all sitting on the call, or they should be in some session. And we think it's negligent of us in the community to not address also our LGBTQ plus veteran population and population in general. They should not be ignored as well. That when you start talking about discrimination and those type of things, it is time for us to understand when we fight for one, we fight for all. And that just means that we have to be able to understand that the differences is what makes us great, and we are okay with embracing those differences. And that goes all the way back to our disabled veterans and everyone else. I can't tell you how many times I think all of you know the experience of people being discriminated against simply because they're a veteran or a disabled veteran. And we have to always, it's easier to point those things out and harder sometimes to point out these things we're talking about right now. Why? Because we have a history in this country that sometimes we try to sanitize and run from. And I think that's our biggest mistake. Our biggest mistake is say, this is what it is. And Boeing is allowing us to have that voice. I know everyone wants me to circle it back to how we're making this work. Stay with me, I'm getting right there. But I just want to make sure the context is given to you, because it's not just about a grant and money. We do not chase money at U.S. Vets. We let money chase us. We're not going to go, we're going to take, not all money is good money. We want to make sure we're making a difference. Next slide. So the grant's telling us we have to hire 40 veterans, achieve not only employment, but have a patent of eliminating barriers. We can provide direct assistance, career access, employment opportunities. I'm not going to stay much on this slide because I think we all understand the employment game. The only difference is we get to target it. I will tell this one anecdote. In having this discussion with our staff, we had to address even some staff that were Caucasian of, well, what are we going to tell them when they say we're only going to give it to them? Like, what about veterans feel slighted? And you may think I got offended, but I didn't. I said, I want to hear those questions, because if you're thinking it, someone else is going to think it. I said, so let me ask you a question. What happens when they say we want to target women veterans? Do we tell the men, do we have to explain to the men why? When we are targeting the veterans with substance abuse problems and don't need that, do we have to explain, well, no, you should get this money too, even though you don't have a substance abuse problem, or a mental health veteran? People can see it in those lenses, but it's hard when you started getting into color. It's hard. It's hard for people to start thinking, oh, that's discrimination. That's reverse discrimination. That's a whole nother hour conversation that I don't have time for. But the bottom line is we addressed it and we said, look, this is targeting that we know we're targeting veterans that have systematically, institutionally, in every other way have been marginalized. Accept it, understand it, and now we're allowing to address it. That's it. Now we can talk about how you feel about it. Those are the facts. Next slide. So I'm going to start moving towards the conclusion. And in order to advance objectives, the one thing I learned in the DEI training is that it has to come from leadership. We can all sit around the table and feel great. And if leadership's not embracing it, then it doesn't matter. Again, I'm blessed that I have that. We are looking to diversify our board of directors. We need work on that, as well as our advisory councils, not just people and women, men of color, but veterans, formerly homeless veterans, disabled, you name it. We need proper representation. The question I asked is some of you may be asking, well, how do you do that without, you say the best person for the job? And my good friend and colleague now, the executive director of Houston, Audrey, he said he brought somebody to teach us how to, to have a conversation of DEI when we got this grant. And he said, well, let me ask you a question. When you apply for it, when you're posting a job, are you posting it at the HBCUs, or you're posting it at the Black Caucus, or you're posting? He was pointing out that you don't have to necessarily try to target an individual. It's about your targeted approach of reaching where those people are and saying, now I have access and opportunity to see there's a job. I wouldn't even have known there was a job because I'm not a part of this other network. So I need to know that it's coming to me. So if you have a board of directors that's predominantly one culture, normally board of directors recruit their friends. Hey, I got a friend, he's gonna join. They're gonna recruit it. Next thing you know, you have a whole board looking alike and you didn't know how you got here. Well, because that's their network. So you have to be purposeful and say, I'm gonna address this by reaching out to the organizations that are represented by marginalized populations, disabled veterans, formerly homeless veterans, veterans of color, women veterans, LGBTQ. Not that you're targeting them because they're that. You're giving them access in their community, because not every veteran of color wants to be working for us. We're not saying we have to. It's got to be someone that has that goal and drive that wants to do that. So it requires us to take a hard look at ourselves. And not everyone likes to do that. Not everyone likes to look at it and say, man, we were doing this wrong. It's okay. Last time I checked, we all don't do everything right all the time. So let's just be like, hey, it's okay. We're not there yet. The fact that we're looking at it and owning it, I'm very proud of our organization for doing that. Next up. So you may say, well, how are you gonna make the change across the nation? You spread across. It should be from bottom up, not top down. Top down has to make the environment okay for it to happen. Top down. But in order to get input, how do you reach that? We're spread over everywhere. I gave a mandate to the executive directors. Your job is to meet with an open forum, whoever wants to come. We're gonna add a strategic plan. We're gonna add a goal about racial diversity, inclusion, equity. We're gonna add something. And we want you to be a part of that. Each executive director had an open forum where 20, 30, 40, 100 can come. Whoever wants to come. They took the working thing that we had, the working statement. They wordsmithed it. Then they came up with objectives to reach that goal. That's going to be a part of our strategic plan. They send it to me. We're going to have an open forum. They get 4 representatives to come to a meeting. We're going to all get on Zoom. Each location, that's going to be over 60 people. We're going to divide into groups. We're going to talk about it. We're going to wordsmith it. We're going to come up with, we all agree. We want proper representation. Because we have sites in Washington, D.C., all the way to Hawaii, we get diversity just because, but we're going to actually target it and make sure that they're in that group. We're going to do all those things, and then my job is to submit it to my boss, Steve Peck, who will then submit it to the board and say, we want this in our strategic plan. That's how you have a opportunity, and you take that opportunity, you go to the trenches to where the people are actually doing it. You get their input, and you work its way back up. And it's going to be comprised of every site, every ethnicity, every demographic that we have in our program. People were jumping. We had to contain it to only 4 to site because everyone wants to be involved. So the way they can get involved is at the site, and just like Congress, we send 2 people to Congress to represent you. But in this case, they're really gonna represent us. Okay, next slide. So I already went through that. We're gonna prioritize it and make it goal focused and make sure that we are going to add it. We wanna make sure it's for African-American veterans, minority veterans, staff volunteers, in everyone, and it's going to continue to broaden. We're not telling you this is our last stop. It's not. We'll continue going on after that as well. This is just be where we're at today. Next slide. So this is the working strategic plan goal. Then we'll have objectives underneath this. But it's the working one that's being wordsmithed across the nation as we speak. U.S. Vets seeks to advance racial equality, diversity, and inclusion for our staff and veterans we serve, to incorporate equality in our policy, decision-making, and programs, and directly increase opportunities for people of color and other minority veteran populations. You tell them from New York now, right? Talk pretty fast. Next slide. So the gentleman on the left is a young, dashing myself, an Air Force Junior ROTC. The gentleman in the middle is me when I joined the Marine Corps, and the gentleman on the right is my oldest son, who said, "Dad, I'm gonna beat your accomplishments by 20 times fold." And he graduated West Point last year, and he's moved on in aviation school. Proud of him. He is all of us had this conversation, single dad, live in Hawaii, and we've had this conversation. In the video you can see on YouTube, we talk about this, how I sat down with both of my sons and talked about the discrimination that's gone on in our country and the things they need to do. And unfortunately, what Jeffrey pointed out is the conversation we continue to have, that we shouldn't have to have. What do you do when you get pulled over? This is what you do. This is what you say. This is how you get it. The most important one that stuck with me: you need to work twice as hard. You do not have a chance. You make up one mistake, you're done. These are the things that are ingrained in us that unfortunately is not necessarily fair, but we deal with it. I'm not blaming anyone in this call. No one on this call should feel bad about what I'm saying. Uncomfortable, maybe, but not bad. It is all our responsibility to change this. And U.S. Vets is taking the platform of Boeing, a grant to employ 40 veterans, which we can do in our sleep. We said, no, this is bigger than that. Let's change our system. Let's change who we are. Let's change it so we can model the behavior we want to be. We ask you to join in that cause with us across the nation. And I think together, we all can tackle this thing. If not our generation behind us will see it.